There we go. All right, Chevra, good morning. I just sent out a WhatsApp to everyone to let you know that this morning's shir will be the last of the week. I have to go out of town for a few days. So I get back Tuesday evening, and I may need a day just to recuperate. So we'll resume shir a week from this Thursday, Mirz Hashem. So we'll have shir next week, Thursday, Friday. Okay? So maybe if you want, you can review some of the stuff we learned and do some research and let us know what you discover when I get back. So we were learning yesterday about the law of when the overcharge is exactly 1/6. And we said that 1/6 has a range because it could either be 1/6 of the value of the commodity or 1/6 of the cash. In other words, if the overpay is anywhere between 20% or 16 and 2/3% and 20%, or if the underpay is anywhere between 83 and 1/3% and 85.7%. So then that's a case where you cannot void the sale entirely, but the person who was the victim is allowed to ask for a refund of the overpay. That's what we were learning yesterday. So if it's less than 1/6, you're not entitled to ask for a refund. If it's exactly 1/6 in that range, then you're allowed to ask for a refund. And we'll see if it's over 1/6, then you can void the sale entirely. So what we're up to is how long and we talked about yesterday, how long does a person have to demand, to sort of bring this halachic claim that he is a victim of ona'ah. So if you are the purchaser and you've been ripped off, you've been overcharged, so you only have a certain limited amount of time. The time that it would take for you to show to an expert or to a friend who could demonstrate to you that you've been victimized, right? But if you don't have an infinite amount of time, so you'd have to be able to make the argument to Beis Din that you only now found out that you had been ripped off. And then we had said also yesterday that if you were the victim of ona'ah, and this is what we left off with, and you didn't go right away, then and you used the item after you were made aware that you were victimized, so then you have no legal recourse whatsoever. You forfeited your legal recourse. So let's go on to Sifkatan Zayin. Lahachzir ha'onah. You have to return the onah. Wrote Salomar kol ha'onah. That is to say, the entire 1/6 that you were overcharged. The loam rinan. Let me just close my door 1 second. The loam rinan. Kaven de pachos mishtus hu mechila. Im kain lefizeh in tzarich lahachzir el hachela kamash lemashtus ulamayla. He says, don't make the argument that since less than 1/6 is not actionable ona'ah, all I have to do is bring down the overcharge to lower than 1/6. So if I charge the guy 125 instead of 100, so all I have to do is give him back, $5, $6. He says, because then I brought it down to below 1/6. He says the lesser. He says once a person has been overcharged by 1/6, he's entitled to the full amount of his overpay. And so therefore you'd have to, if the value is only 100, the person is allowed to demand back the entire, and he paid 125, he's entitled to the entire 25. If it's less than 1/6, then you don't have to return. He says, because generally people are forgiving with less than 1/6, And that's the general way that people do business, is that there's always going to be slight variations in the profit margin, because that's just the way business runs. Wrote Salomar, that is to say, that is to say, that even though we've already clarified that lechatchila you should not overcharge or underpay a person, an unsuspecting other party, even one pruta, even a penny, right? You shouldn't go beyond what its real value is. Mikol makom b'di'eved ein tzarich lahachzer. But b'di'eved, post facto, you don't have to return you return the overcharge if a person was overcharged by a few pennies. V'yesh omrim, there are those who say, De'imhu yarei shamayim, that if a person is a God-fearing person, and she'ina lechavero pachos mishnus, yachzirei lahamitzana mimenu, v'tzarachim. There are those who opine that if you're a God-fearing person and you want to go above and beyond the letter of the law, and you are aware that you overcharged the person from fair market value, even a few pennies, you should try your best to return that amount to him. But he says it's not so clear. V'tzarachiyun, if he ends off with something that says tzarachiyun, then Rav Stern essentially means that, even though there is such an opinion, there's what to deliberate in this matter. How far a person who really wants to do everything just correctly has to go to extremes in order to make sure that he hasn't overcharged anyone or underpaid anyone. And the language of the Rav Shulchan Aruch is that it's impossible all the time for a buyer and a seller to get the exact amount of fair market value. So a slight variation is acceptable. So he quotes the Aruch HaShulchan now, Kasav b'Aruch HaShulchan, Shezeh eino ela b'schoros she'en lahem kvias mekach b'tzimtzum. That's only referring to this argument that overcharging and underpaying by a small variant of less than a sixth is not something that you need to worry about. He says that's only true with merchandise that does not have a fixed index value that is quite precise. But if there is a commodity that all merchants sell exactly for the same price, and there's a fixed index that's published daily, let's say in Israel, that's not true here in Canada, but in Eretz Yisrael, there used to be bread and flour and certain like eggs, milk, that was subsidized, and as a result of the subsidized price, their government made a requirement that everyone charge exactly the same amount. So things like that. He says that in that situation, there's an obligation to return the ona'ah, even if it's less than a sixth, because where there's a fixed index price, and everyone by law has to charge the same amount. So then there's, because the person who overcharged violated the law, that even with charging less than a sixth of an overcharge, he would have to return that. But v'tzarachiyun, and here too, it's not so clear to me, says the Imrei Yaakov. Okay, ad shtus, he says, if you overcharge up until 1/6, or you underpay up until 1/6, so then you don't have to do any action. There's no actionable item there. So nimtza diyeshnam gimel chilukim ba'ona. So it turns out, and this is an important sif katan, because what he's doing basically is providing us the three different categories of ona'ah. Three different categories of ona'ah. Pachos mishtus, nikna hamekach vein tzarich lahachzir ona'ah demachal inish. If the amount of ona'ah is less than a sixth, so then the sale is binding, it's final, and there's no obligation for the party who exploited the other party to return the amount that was overcharged. Yeser al shtus, batal hamekach legamre. If the overcharge was more than a sixth, So then that nullifies the sale entirely. And therefore, the person who was exploited is allowed to completely demand complete money back guarantee, and he can completely void the sale in a beis din. Ushtos b'tzimtzum hamekach kayim etzarich lahachzir hona. But if it's exactly a sixth, and as we said, it's either a sixth of the item's value, or it's an overpay of over a sixth of the cash, so then the sale is valid, sale is binding, but it is necessary to return the overpay or the underpay or the overcharge. Odroi Leda, I want to point out something else. He says, that when we say that when there's an overcharge of more than a sixth, and that nullifies the sale, hani mili kishiyesh bo shir shahadas toabo. He has another qualification. That's when we're dealing with an overcharge of such an amount that it's possible for a consumer to make such an error. Like if I charge you 125 instead of 100, it's possible that an unsuspecting consumer would not realize that he's overpaying. And then when he discovers that he's been ripped off more than a sixth, he's entitled to nullify the sale. Aval im hosif bichdei she'ein hadas toa. But let's say the consumer overpays, and instead of giving the guy 100 for the commodity, he gives him 300. And he says there, it's not possible that he's making a mistake because it's such an outlandish amount that he's paying. Why is he doing it? There, the reason why he's overpaying by so much is because he wishes to give a gift to the seller, or he recognizes the true value, but he's giving such a deep discount because he needs to unload this surplus commodity and just get rid of it. He needs to dump it, so to speak. As we'll see later on. So basically, it's all about exploitation, right? When there's clear exploitation, so sometimes you completely void the sale, and sometimes you cannot void the sale, but you can demand a refund of the amount that you overpaid, or demand that the purchaser pay you the amount that you were originally entitled to. But when it's clear from the circumstances that the seller or the buyer is not being exploited, they are fully aware of what they are doing by either overpaying or undercharging, so then there's no obligation to return the ona, and there's no nullification of sale. So it would have to be demonstrated in beis din. Did the person know? Did the person not know? And that's something that we're going to expand upon in the ensuing halachas. Okay.
Let me ask a quick question.
Sure.
Could there not be exploitation and knowledge? In other words, there's a time of shortage or whatever, and they're overcharging for something by a lot. The person buying it knows it's way over the price it should be, but they're willing to pay because the shortage is. So I would still call that exploitation with knowledge.
Well, it is exploitation, but it's not that this is a unique situation of ona. In other words, ona is such where everyone else is paying X, and I'm being asked to pay more than that. But market value is determined by supply and demand. That's always how market value is determined, right? And it's not exploitation if the merchant got a surplus of goods that he needs now to unload, and because the market turned on him, he's now going to incur a loss. That's not my individual issue. That's always a risk that people take when they get involved in business. You take a risk that when you, let's say, when I'm a vendor, if I purchase a whole bunch of goods on the wholesale market, and then I decide to sell them to the retail consumer, there's always a risk that I'm going to take a loss because the bottom of the market will fall out. But that's not, I wouldn't call that exploitation, because what I mean by exploitation is when you are taking advantage of someone's ignorance.
I see.
That's the real definition of
Yeah, I might be using the term too loosely. Like, when the toilet paper prices went through the roof 3 months ago, that wasn't exploiting individuals. That was um, maybe exploiting a situation. But I guess that's different from what we're talking about here.
Yes, correct. Right. That's true, because there were very bad players, right? People who were behaving badly and were exploiting the situation by for Purell and for toilet paper and for all of these very essential commodities, and were exploiting that, or they were buying in bulk and therefore depriving other people of the opportunity to get those commodities, right? That's true. That's true, but that's a different kind of exploitation from the exploitation
That's
of
great.
Allah. There,
Thank you,
prob-
Rabbi.
there probably is something in halacha that would address that, although I don't know what you would call that. Okay.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
another question on that topic. I've read. I'm by no means an expert in economics or this whole concept, but that, for example, like let's say when Purell, like the price gouging, what you would call, right?
Right.
That it's actually a good thing, and I'll tell you why. Is that, for example, like let's say at the height of the pandemic, Purell is still, $4 a bottle as opposed to $20 a bottle. That
Mhm.
if you leave it at $4 a bottle, what you're doing actually is encouraging hoarding by people. So by keeping it at 20, like let's say by having it at such a high price as people are in theory would be willing to pay, you're allowing more people to buy the item, as opposed to if you keep it at the regular price. And we did see this, with many items where people were just hoarding toilet paper, Kleenex, et cetera, to the fact that, there was none for lots of people. So
Right.
the argument is by keeping it at a high price, it discourages people from hoarding.
That's true. Right. Right. Yes. Yes. I mean, I guess that argument could be made. Okay. But we nonetheless saw individuals who were buying mass amounts from mom and pop shops around all around them, and then putting them up on Amazon for huge profit margins. So we're not talking about a regular retailer. We're talking about private individuals who are definitely exploiting a situation. All right.
What about though the concept of charging whatever the market will bear? Like if I decide to put a bottle of Purell on Amazon for $100, which is ridiculous, but somebody pays it willingly, is there a problem?
Well, again, we're talking in the laws, for the laws of Ona'ah to kick in. We're talking about a scenario where there's a standard market value or standard market price, and you're charging way more, and you're taking advantage of someone else's ignorance. In a situation like we saw in the pandemic, where people were charging $100 a bottle for Purell, it was clear to the consumer that a regular bottle would be $4, and that this person is exploiting the situation. So there's no ignorance at play. It's just a question of how desperate a person is. So there's no ona'ah, so to speak, in the situation that we're talking about. It could be considered an act of cruelty if a person has an essential commodity and he has cornered the market on that essential commodity, and then takes advantage of people's need of that commodity. I'm not sure what that's called. It's definitely an evil, but I don't know under what category yet it falls up. Remember, there was a guy who purchased a pharmaceutical company a couple years back, and this pharmaceutical company had the corner on a certain drug, and he decided that this drug was so, even though it was essential for people with a certain illness, he inflated the price of, by 1,000%. And he became a pariah. He became, public enemy number one, because even though legally it was within his right to do so, he was exploiting people because he had a monopoly on this particular commodity. So I think there is something in halacha that addresses monopolization and exploiting the consumer based on a monopoly. But that's not the law of ona'ah that we're discussing here. We'll have to get to that a little bit later on at some point. I'm not sure where it is, but I think I remember seeing it
But
somewhere.
wasn't it the story about when fish prices went sky high and then the rabbis said, don't buy fish on Friday or something like that, so that they would sort of punish the people who were elevating the price of fish? Is there something
Yeah,
historic about that?
yeah. I mean, it sounds familiar, right? Ultimately, if there's collusion among merchants, and we will get to those halachos of where issues of collusion, issues of unfair competition, and all of those other things, those are all included in the laws of Choshen Mishpat that we're learning now. So let's say that you have a bunch of merchants who collude to artificially inflate the price, whether it's fish or something else. So then, what is that? That's criminal, and it is within the purview of the Beis Din of, let's say, a town, to basically say what you're doing is wrong, and if the merchants refuse to heed, I guess that the resort that they can resort to is to tell people, don't buy fish, right? Don't buy this commodity until we put pressure on the merchants. Supply and demand. Okay, let's take a look at a couple of items from the Likutim, and then we'll call it a day. Chayiv lahachzir ha'onah im hishtus shivoy mekach. So we had said that if the overcharge was a sixth of the value, so instead of paying 100, you paid 120. Machar lo shava shishim b'chamishim ve'echas o lehevech. Deleka kanu na'ashtus. Let's say a person had a commodity that's worth 60, and instead of selling it for 50, which would be a classic ona'ah, he sells it for 51. Okay, he sells it for less than its real value, but within the margin of a sixth. There's no ona'ah. Ulagabe echad havi bittul mekach ulagabe sheni mechila. Azlinan basar hamekach hein le'inyan bittul mekach hein le'inyan mechila. The to inshi b'mekach below b'maos v'yesh cholkin. So in this kind of situation, for some people, this would be considered to be ulagabe echad havi bittul mekach. That for one person, this would be considered something that he had never intended to do. And for another type of seller, this would be something that, new. It's something that I'm moichel on, because even though I had planned to, I didn't realize that I undercharged my customer. I'm willing to be moichel. So azlinan basar hamekach hein le'inyan bittul mekach hein le'inyan mechila. He says, so then you go, so basically I think what he's essentially saying that it depends, even though there are subjective issues, that for some people, some merchants would be upset that they undercharged, and other people would psychologically be okay with it. They would be okay. So he says, you have to go according to the general attitude of most merchants. Because it is considered to be, I'm not really sure what this halacha is addressing, but he's basically saying is that you have to go according to the strict letter of what is considered to be a sixth. The language in this paragraph is not so clear, so I'll have to get clarity on it at a later date. Let's go on to the next halacha. Lahachzir ha'onah. You have to return the overcharge or the underpay. So bamed dvarim amurim b'mocher nichsei atzma. This is only true if the person who's the merchant who's overcharging is selling his own commodity. Aval hashaliach o apotropos sheta'a v'nis'ana b'chol shehu. But if, let's say, a custodian, a person or a broker who is buying and selling on behalf of the actual buyer, but he's not the actual buyer, he's just the shaliach of the buyer. V'nis'ana b'chol shehu, bein b'metaltalin, bein b'karka, choser. So if he's a victim, if what we're talking about here is a shaliach or an apotropos, and they make a mistake, and as a result of their mistake, they were ripped off or they undercharged, then whether it's chattel or whether it's real estate, the buyer or the seller who was exploited based on the ignorance of the shaliach is allowed to ask for a refund even if it's less than a sixth. The imina es halokeach yesh mi she'omer shuhu adin shemechro batel b'chol shehu, and therefore there are some who say that if a person who's a buyer appointed a representative to buy on his behalf, and then he later realizes after the purchase was made that he was overcharged. So there are some people who say that even if it's less than a sixth, he has a right to nullify the purchase, because he could say that if I had purchased it myself, I wouldn't have made that mistake. I wouldn't have paid that amount because I would have realized what was wrong. V'yesh misha omer shadino kishar kol adam. And others argue, and they say that no, any kind of overcharge, even if the overcharge was made to your representative and not to you directly, you're not entitled to a refund, because we assume that anything that's within the margin of a sixth, a person is moichel, a person is going to forgive. So therefore, if you're a seller and you want to sell a piece of real estate or some other commodity, and you appoint someone as your representative, as your agent to sell it for you, and then you realize that the agent undercharged the consumer, so then the post can say that the seller is entitled to a refund or to get paid the balance of what is owed to him, and he can claim that his representative did not represent him according to his wishes. And like the Makoro says, that the valid claim is that the actual seller can claim as follows. He can say, I only appointed this person to be my agent if he was going to be helping me, to be helpful to me. But if he, instead of using his agency to help me, he actually used his agency to harm me because he undercharged the consumer, I have a right to demand a refund, even if to demand, to be made whole on the purchase, even if the fellow underpaid by less than a sixth. So there are poskim who say that a person has a right to do that, and he can nullify the sale, even if the undercharge was less than a sixth. But some argue, and some say that no, that in all cases of either overcharging a sixth or underpaying a sixth, it's considered to be a mechila. It's considered to be a full forgiveness, and you're not entitled to nullify the act of the agent. Okay. And this is where...
Rabbi, on that point, would the recourse not be to the agent and not to the ultimate buyer?
Well, the agent should not be liable to have to go out of pocket unless he had some kind of agreement in writing with the person who made him his agent. Like if I appoint someone an agent and I say, here, go out and sell it for fair market value, and he goes ahead and sells it for less than fair market value, but it's within a sixth margin, the agent can say, listen, I thought that this was fair market value. It's within a sixth. It's not like it's such an aberrant amount that I sold it for. So what do you want from me? I did sell it for within a certain margin of fair market value, and therefore you should be moichel. That's the one argument. The other argument is that the seller can say, no, you didn't carefully research it. Does he have legal recourse against the agent? I don't know. It doesn't seem like he has legal recourse against the agent. He would have legal recourse against the buyer. And he could tell the buyer, he's got to identify who the buyer is. The question, I guess, is what if he sells it to the agent sells it to a non-Jew? Then it doesn't seem like if it's and you can't track down the buyer. What legal recourse do I have against the shaliach who takes something of mine and undersells it for such an exorbitant discount that it actually ends up harming me? Do I have legal recourse against the shaliach? It could very well be that I do, because there's a whole concept in halacha that I only made you my shaliach to help me. I didn't make you my shaliach to injure me. So at the moment that you injured me by using my item and fetched a very, very low price that is well below well beyond the sixth that is fair market value that people reasonably make errors with, so then it could be I have legal recourse against the shaliach if we can't track down the buyer. I don't know, but we have no indication here yet of what the halacha there is. But it would seem reasonable, it would seem logical that would be the case. Okay, so I wish you all a good rest of the week, and I hope everyone's doing good. And we will see you, Mirza Hashem, next week, okay?
So we're off until
Mazel tov,
Monday.
Rabbi.
I came in late, so we're off till Monday. Is that right?
We're off until
No, Thursday.
Off
I
until
thought it was Thursday.
Yeah, off until next Thursday. Take care.
Off until next Thursday.
Well, Rabbi.